morning again, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. My name is Julia Klein. I'm a marketing manager at ivoflow, and I'd like to warmly welcome you to today's webinar, How Spend Analytics and Should Costing Work Hand in Hand in Procurement. Great to have you with us. Thank you for taking the time to join. Before we dive in, just a few quick housekeeping notes. The session will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. You can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A panel. And of course, we'll do our best to address as many questions as possible. If we won't make it, we will make sure to reach out to you via email afterwards. Now, I'm excited to introduce today's speakers, Tobias Uding, Head of Sales at costdata, and Nicolas Neubauer, Co-founder and Managing Director at ivoflow. And with that, I'm handing it over to our first speaker, Nick, and say enjoy the webinar.
Yeah, also welcome everyone from my end. Thanks, Julia, for kicking it off. Before we go into the topic, what to expect today. First of all, what's cool, we will show live demo sessions of both the costdata and also the ivoflow tool. And the overall purpose of the meeting is to address a little bit the pain point in the industry that typically cost engineering and procurement somewhat work isolated, data is isolated. And yeah, we want to bring across what kind of synergies and benefits you can expect again as an organization if we bring those two functions together, not only from the governance perspective, but also from the data and data integration perspective. Yeah, like Julia said, we will try to address all the questions which are coming in through the chat. We will spare a little bit of time at the end of the webinar for a Q&A session. Yeah, but I would now like to hand it over to Tobias to introduce you quickly to costdata and show the solution. And then I will obviously do the same. And at the end of the webinar, we will see how everything works integrated. And yeah, just once again, my name again, Nick Neubauer, co-founder and managing director here at ivoflow. Tobias.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thanks, Nick, for the intro. Thanks to all the audience for being here. Always a pleasure, yeah, meeting new people I have seen before. So, and I hope we can give you new touching points for professionalizing your daily business. So my name is Tobias Uding. I'm head of sales at costdata, responsible for all global operations we are doing at costdata. So always saying in the morning, starting with China, ending in the evening with the West Coast, US, so globally working. We will tell you more about costdata, but especially for sure telling you more about what we are doing and what we are offering, especially up to connecting in procurement, spend analytics, and should costing. So this is absolutely right. So a main point, and you see in our brand, it's called costdata. So this was always, or let's say it was already the vision of our founder nearly 30 years ago, that having data, having valid data is the base for doing any good decision. So I learned in the last months, you can say in the US, shit in, shit out. When you talk with the UK based, you have to say garbage in, garbage out. Just a short story, by the way. But this is the truth, yeah? So you need valid data to come to valid results and valid decisions. So this is what we see, and I guess Nick will confirm that also when we look into what ivoflow is doing, that it mainly depends on the quality of the data and also of the connection of the data, because there might be some teams where you have better data and there might be some teams where you do not know about that good data are already existing. So the disconnect between the different teams is something which is really a problem, and which avoids to get to the best. You see opportunities of getting savings, efficiency, and profitability. So first of all, the question will be how we get the right data and how we get the right data to the right people or to all the people from an interdisciplinary approach. So, and this is also telling you directly why we are sitting together, because all of these two companies here are doing, hopefully I can say, a very, very good job on its own, but we do have different target groups. And the question is, how can we get the people together? How can we give them the same valid data? And how can we help them to come to the right conclusions. So we will tell you more, I will tell you more from the cost data perspective, which is covering the should costing approach. So the calculation of a cost breakdown, of a cost structure, which can be a base for then taking that into a strategic and operative approach doing spend analytics. And also we will look, I said before, not only on the results, we will also look on the data, on the raw data, on the inputs, which are needed to come to such results. Just a short a few words to our company. I said before, nearly 30 years in the business now. I'm looking sometimes a little bit older, sometimes a little bit younger, but everybody of you see I was not part of the first hour being at Cost Data, but I'm doing that now for around 10 years. So having seen many things, people, companies in the last years. And what's quite interesting is that in the last years, I would say starting with COVID, this was getting a push. It's not only up to that companies working more with digitalization and with software and trying to find efficient solutions. I do not want to start using the buzzword AI now, but it all started with, unfortunately, all the problems we see in this world. Yeah, pressure on material cost, pressure on labor rates. Yeah, based on the inflation, what we have seen. Which had also and still having, some of you might be from Germany, we're talking about energy costs at the moment. So and the structure of companies, the overheads is also something which is affected. So more and more pressure, more and more need to professionalize costing, and there's where cost data is a proven partner. And in the meantime, we developed a couple of solutions. So thank you very much. We have a wider portfolio at Cost Data. Our USP is, as said in the beginning, is providing valid benchmark and market data. So all data which are needed to do a professional cost analysis. It can be a full calculation, should costing calculation, a calculation of a purchase part. It can be used for challenging your own competitiveness, so looking from a controlling or even sales perspective, but also on R&D. So in addition to that, we are offering software solutions which are covering this kind of calculation services. So if you need data, you can get them. If you need data and software to do that, we really welcome. And if you need the guidance all around, it's also possible to work with us as we have a consulting team which is also doing trainings, because it's not only software and it's not only data, it's also needed that we have still human beings with the right skills to work with the extracts we get out of such a software. And it's the same for ivoflow, I guess, saying directly. At the end, it's a tool. It's not a magic box. We're working every day on getting a magic box, more or less, but there's still a need that we have people who have the skills and the knowledge and use on a very high efficiency the results which they get out from the software solutions. And we are working also on the connection, more and more on the connection of the solutions, that we're getting even more efficiency, and that they can use the results by using their human power, the empathy that they have, and their skills of negotiation to get to the right results. So, and this is why I said it's still needed to have a guidance, to have a power, to have a partner on your side. These are some companies you see working with cost data. So just a few ones, but I guess a few impressive ones. So as said in the beginning, for us, it doesn't matter where you are, yeah, and which time zone you are working, and where you are living. We have companies from all around the world. We have companies from different industries. So it doesn't have any effect whether you are doing more metal, plastic, or electronics in your, whether you are in a automotive sector or even a machinery, medical device, or whatever. All of these companies you see here working with our software and data solutions. So we are now a proven partner, and we are growing, especially internationally. So this was also one of the reasons why we said we do that as an English-speaking course, because just to tell you, in the last year, Cost Data has made 80% of new clientship outside of German, Austrian, and Swiss regions. So again, even when we are, let's say, as we are a German company, no problem working with you wherever you are. So just looking on the next slide, Nick, thank you very much. So I tried to find a good intro before, so we just also noted a few points here why we highlighted or why we highlight today this aspect of should costing. And in this way, thank you very much to ivoflow for being part of this webinar, because we as a partner also about several years we are working together. We had always seen this story of connecting should costing and spend analytics and procurement activities, but for a longer time it was a little bit underrepresented. But what we have seen in the last 12 and 18 months was that people from the different teams are now they have understood that working on its own, it's not the right decision anymore, that we have to connect people from different departments more efficiently. And therefore it's needed to have software solutions which can be connected easily without having big effort, that you can work with the same data, with the same results, and that you get to the same conclusions, which you can use in the different teams. And should costing is one part which is coming from cost data. Either you are working with our software solutions or whether you are working with us as a consulting company, everything is possible. It depends on your situation in the market and what's your, let's say, what's your power, what's your maturity level of your organization. There's no one single point of truth or way of truth. Yeah, so you always have to take that into relation. This is where I say at this moment, feel welcome if this is getting interesting for you. We should go more into detail and see what's your situation and what's the right way. Yeah? Sometimes it could be a complete should costing calculation, which is leading to a cost breakdown. I will show you more in the software how it looks like, but it could also be just a cost structure, which is quite enough to use it in a spend analytics tool to understand what's the impact on material, what's the impact coming from labor. So in some industry, you want to calculate the third digit after the point. In other industries, you just want to know, okay, what's the impact of material on my complete commodity range. So again, there's no right or wrong. It always depends on the situation. And we want to give this point into discussion, into the portfolio, that you have a proven partner who can help you setting up the cost structures or getting, if needed, a full should costing calculation. And this can be used, I say again, from the procurement perspective, which is our main point today, main target today, but just keep it a little bit wider. Also think about the engineer, think about controlling, think about sales. With our cost data market data solution, this is the base where we have the data. And on the next slide, you get a little impression about the cost data calculation and the modules. So a cost data calculation is the tool to do the full calculation, to do the full should costing calculation. Next to that, we have another module which is called commodity price tracker. And with the commodity price tracker, we can easily aggregate from a cost calculation, from a full cost breakdown, a cost structure, which is then a little bit more, as said, aggregated level of cost, but what can be for many companies quite enough if they do not have the capabilities, the power, the need, the maturity level to do full calculations. And with both of these, cost structure and cost analysis, cost calculations, we have a direct connection which can be used in the ivoflow tool, because this is exactly the base which is needed to do the analysis over there. This is what Nick will show us later. Now the next step is to show you more about our software and how it looks like. Let's say how it's working. So far from my side, as said, it depends on how you're working today and what's your goal, where you want to go. So, and how you work with ivoflow today. So, but we will find exactly the right approach to help you to get more clarification and more transparency on the cost. Should costing is having a wide range, yeah. So, but let's go into detail with each other and see how the right way looks like for you. And how it looks like in combination with ivoflow. So up to you, Nick.
Thanks, Tobias. Thanks for the insights in cost data as an organization, also in two of your main functions, costing data and cost models. I have also prepared 3 slides to quickly give a little bit of an idea what the ivoflow value is, especially by connecting now the procurement world with what Tobias just explained. ivoflow, very briefly, we are a company focusing on spend and price analytics and intelligence, working exclusively with manufacturing companies, which typically have a 50% bomb to sales ratio. That means there is typically a lot of pressure on the procurement organizations, especially if we look into automotive, margins are quite low. So I think the challenge of every procurement professional in this industry is to identify opportunities to reduce cost in order to support the organization to drive profitability. And that's exactly why we founded ivoflow. We wanted to give a tool to the buyers, which not only is showing them the status quo of spend, but also producing, let's call it, fresh ideas on where negotiations can be executed and where some saving potentials are. Yeah. So if we put our product, and we will look on it in a minute, in a nutshell, it's basically about transparency, accessing the spend data, and then basically drilling it down into your different part numbers and sub-commodities. And there we obviously generate new ideas on cost save potentials and help also to negotiate and execute those. And in the end, it's a full circle which goes back into the reporting. How do we identify opportunities? We have basically 10 tools in our, we call it cost saving toolbox. But today the focus is really on everything which is be generated leveraging market data and cost models. So that's the purpose for today. Who's interested in the other 9 levers? Yeah, happy to walk you through offline. Then very, very briefly on our, we call it somewhat layering model value framework. Everything starts with data. I think Tobias already said. At the bottom, you have all the legacy systems the companies have implemented many, many years ago. You have all the market data. You want to run your spend analytics. You want to get insights into prices. So that's exactly what we do, connecting data and analyzing data. And today it's basically about the combination of the internal ERP data, the procurement data, everything about master and transactional data. And it's about how to connect it to should costing. That's what Tobias showed us in the tool. And it's about ingesting market intelligence. Yeah? So what does a change in material cost and labor cost and energy cost mean for me on a part number level, but also on the entire supplier commodity or for the entire organization when we bring market and price intelligence together. So that's what I will show you later in the demo, again, connecting the dots between procurement, market, and should costing data. The benefit you obviously get from it is that you have the data centrally integrated, not the silos anymore. This is cost engineering. This is market data. That's our procurement data. It's one common base. When we have a cost model, we can obviously align this live with market data and use this to trigger new ideas for saving potentials, but also give obviously alerts, hey, market is going up. This could mean for your part price X, Y, Z. Yeah. And I think that was one thing I was really, personally speaking, always frustrated with. I have been in the industry for about 10 years in strategic purchasing, and we put a lot of efforts in challenging the suppliers to provide cost breakdowns. We put a lot of effort in from the cost engineering side to calculate cost models. And then we used it for the sourcing event, and then it went to the SharePoint. It went in the nirvana. Nobody looked at it again. But the industrial products typically have a life cycle of 7 years. And what we want to make sure is that all the smart data we generate with cost breakdowns, cost models are used throughout the entire product life cycle. So that's what it is about. I don't want to further walk you through more slides. Let's jump right into the demo and see what's the value we want to bring to the table with cost data, cost models, and the ivoflow solution. with ivoflow and cost data.
Completely agree with you. Just let me add a short sentence. I always asking the people, do you really wait for the supplier who's contacting you and saying, oh, we have to reduce the price? If you're waiting for somebody like that, you can wait for a long time. So it's up to you as a proactive party and company to use data and tools and give them as a support to your organization, to your team, that they can moderate that on their own. And this is, as you said, with the cost structure, which is probably based on a should costing calculation coming from cost data, for example. You don't need to do that on your own. Yeah. So I said we just the software, if the company is planning to do that on their own completely, but this could also be done as a service to fill this gap, this knowledge gap, getting a valid and valuable cost structure, and then putting in the right data, and based on that you get a very good extract about the and overview about the market. You can see in ivoflow, as you have shown, Nick, the potentials, and you can build up based on that a proactive, and this is the big word, a proactive strategy. I have seen so many companies in the last years, and this was the second question I was asking them, do you have a proactive strategy? And many companies said, no, we just react. Honestly said, we just react. And this is the second point where I say, do not wait and be proactive. Yeah, use tools, use data to understand how the market is going, to be the proactive pushing partner. And pushing is not negative. Yeah, just using the potentials in the market. Yeah, and this is, as you see here on the slide, or as you're showing here on the slide. Yeah, the connection of our companies, of our portfolios, of our possibilities, to show some kind of reality, market versus costs. Yeah. So.
And Tobias, I think especially, I think it's almost 4 or 5 years where we see not only big fluctuations in market prices, but also on a very high frequency, right? So when I was actively in purchasing, yes, prices went up, prices went down, but it was on a quite long time period. And at the minute, prices across everything, energy we see, material we see, is super fast changing. And if you are an organization which has, like I said, like I showed in the demo, multiple different categories across metals, plastics, etc., I think it's mission impossible to stay on top of everything. And exactly, that's the case we want to support. And I think, cost versus market reality, I think is one of the key things, because yes, the sourcing event typically happens once, you do your negotiations, but then you need to make sure that prices are aligned over the entire project life cycle. And basically that's the message which should come across today, and hope we deliver this. Tobias, I'm doing a little bit of timekeeper here. I think we have about 8 minutes left in the webinar. Julia was, I think, actively looking into the question chat if any questions came up. So maybe we use the last minutes to address the most questions we can do, and then obviously, like we said at the beginning, we will obviously provide our contact information if there are further more detailed questions regarding ivoflow, regarding cost data. Happy to take them also offline.
Yes, perfect. I'm back to walk you through the Q&A session. Thanks, Nick, for keeping an eye on the time. We now have roughly 7 minutes left, and I'd say let's start with the first question. It's a quite long one. I'm going to read it out to you, Tobias, because I think it refers to cost data. When using cost data software and database, one of the main challenges is that the price breakdown or cost breakdown sent to suppliers had a different cost structure than the cost calculation made by the cost engineering. Is this still the case? Is the price breakdown filled out by supplier directly? And can it be compared with the cost calculation done by the cost engineer?
I would say for 100%, there's always a difference. And this is the nature of the different parties sitting on the, let's say, table. Because on the one hand, coming from procurement, doing our job, we want to find the potentials and also getting a little bit the challenging point into the discussion. That doesn't mean that we are not fair, but we want to find potentials. On the other side, from the sales perspective of a company, you always try to include most of the risk. Yeah, and also some kind of margins, and probably more margins than you can really show. So there's always a natural bias, means there's a difference between the calculations. And the
Maybe
main
Tobias,
point,
if I can add something here, I think we also need to separate between what at least I know as best practice greenfield and best practice brownfield, right? So what the cost engineer typically is doing in step one, he is calculating a component on the greenfield in the best possible scenario in a region with the best labor rate, with good energy cost, on the perfect machine, with almost no downtimes, etc. That's typically the starting point. But then I think it's again an organizational thing that procurement needs to be involved and say, hey, nice try. Quite ambitious target you're calculating here, but actually looking at our supply base, there is no supplier in Vietnam which is able to produce this kind of quality we need for this part or with this kind of technology. And then obviously it's about to adjust it. So you have the perfect world, and then you have the world you can also basically consume from based on your supply base. Yeah.
So
okay,
completely right.
sorry.
Just to add, to come to the question, to the core of the question, and this is the interpretation of what we are doing here. It's not about finding one single point of truth and competing with that. It's a door opener. So we are showing with the should cost calculation the potentials which might be there based on the assumptions we made, and then we get a feedback. So it's about communication process. It's not about, see, this is 5, you want 10, you are wrong, we are right. It's about getting an understanding about each other, finding where do we find some misinterpretations. As said, if there are 30% profit within the part, this is something which we cannot accept, because then one of the two parties cannot be competitive anymore. And this is what we want to challenge. And so the data which we use in the should cost analysis which we use is a door opener for further discussion, which you do not have if you do not do that, because you can then just work with the data you get from the suppliers. You can compare them, you find some obvious differences, but you do not find the potential which is lying under that. So don't, again, as a conclusion, it's not just taking that, finding a new level, pushing it through the supply chain. Now it's using another tool, information, to get into a deeper discussion, getting a better understanding, which is following to the fact that you mostly get more savings than before.
Thank you, Tobias. Nick, would you like to take the next question? How do you integrate the cost data in the ivoflow software, case by case or via a direct connection?
At the moment, case by case. Tobias and I obviously working on the direct connection, but the case by case, I haven't shown it today because I wanted to focus on the results, not how do we get there. It's basically a drag and drop upload. So I actually prepared this one part number right before the demo. Tobias sent me the cost breakdown. I had the 2 supplier quotes, and it took me, I don't know, 60 to 90 seconds to import those 3 models and to look into the comparisons and insights.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have another question about ivoflow. Can I compare supplier cost breakdowns, Nick?
Yes, 100%. That was basically the screen I was showing. Not for every part you calculate a model. Typically, it's for the more expensive or for the higher impact part. If you have components where you have just cost breakdowns, you can compare supplier against supplier. And then basically what we do is we somehow follow a cherry picking approach, make a what if scenario. What if we could apply the super competitive processing cost from supplier A, but get the material cost from supplier B, and show also where our negotiations point to address.
Okay, perfect. Tobias, this one's for you. How often are cost databases being updated, and how does cost data manage price fluctuations with regards to databases updates for materials, machines, etc.?
Yes, we have our own research team. So traditionally, this is doing now nearly 30 years, this research about all our data. All of our data are based on a mix of primary and secondary sources. So we really go into detail, chilling that in projects and also and always in conversation and communication with our clients. So we do not get any data from the clients, no fear, yeah. So, but we get for sure feedback, and then this is leading to a monthly update cycle. So we are updating mostly in the mid of the month the data, especially the material data, because in these times nowadays it's not really possible waiting any longer. For other data, it might be not such needed, let's say, doing that frequently as machines and labor. But as said, it's our guarantee, let's say, that all these data are monitored and tracked. And based on the different sources we are using, we are always quite sure and we can ensure that the data on the maximum of quality all around the world, whatever you're needing.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we have 1 minute to go, but we still have many questions in the Q&A. I'd say last question to you, Nick. How is the acceptance of suppliers to the ivoflow findings in the real negotiations? Are there examples which could be mentioned?
That's a very good question. By the way, I changed the slide here. You have the contact information, Julia. When you say many questions left, feel free to reach out. This is quite a big question. I would really love to address this, whoever asked this in more detail, but we have, like I said earlier, 10 levers. Some of them are more strategic nature, some of them are more operational price alignments, and I think there is no general answer to this question. I think the acceptance on adjusting prices to market reality, that's typically not the biggest challenge, but obviously we have to watch out. The supplier also might come back and wants to play the game the other way around. Yeah, so that's why we also sometimes recommend to go through rebates and set piece price adjustments to keep the baseline same. But again, super nice question. I would have a very long answer to this. So whoever asked this, feel free to discuss this with me offline.
Next round.
Right. Exactly, in the next webinar. Okay, looking at the time, I'd say we wrap things up. Thank you again to the speakers, to Tobias and Nick, for sharing your insights, your perspectives. Also, thank you for the audience for joining and contributing to the conversation. And now I wish you a nice rest of the day and hope to see you in one of our next webinars.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.